This incompetent cannot even get a right request, Richard Ashford muttered high enough for Maya Reyes to hear, while removing an imaginary hair from the glass of wine. Typical. Hire these people, and then we have to suffer the consequences. Maya remained motionless next to La Lumiere's table 14, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, where men like Richard spent on a meal the equivalent of her monthly salary. His fingers discreetly tightened the silver tray as he gestured dramatically to his fellow executives, clearly taking advantage of the public spectacle of humiliation. It brings another wine, and this time it tries not to contaminate with your hair, ordered, his laugh echoing through the silent dining room where other clients observed with that peculiar mixture of embarrassment and complicity that rich people show when they witness injustices committed against invisible workers. Maya was only 28 years old, and never imagined that her 3 years working at that establishment would end with a public accusation of incompetence based purely in the tone of her skin and accent that carried as a scar of a life divided between two worlds. Born in the Philippines and raised in Queens since he was 8 years old, she knew that look closely, the look that reduced you to a convenient stereotype that erased all her humanity with a simple discharge gesture. Mr. Ashford, started Maya with a low but firm voice. I personally checked this glass before serving. Are you calling me a liar? Richard leaned forward, his blue eyes shining with that casual cruelty that powerful men exert when they know that there will be no consequences. Because if you are, we can solve this right now with your manager. Maya took a deep breath, her eyes rapidly traveling the restaurant. Daniel, the manager, watched from the kitchen entrance with that expression she knew well, the expression of someone who had already decided that a rich client was worth more than the dignity of a Philippine employee. Sarah, the sommelier, looked away. Marcus, the maître, intensely examined the reserve book as if the secrets of the universe contained. No, sir, Maya finally answered, every word costing a piece of her soul. I'll get another wine immediately. That's it, honey. He knows his place. Richard turned to his companions with a satisfied smile. These people need to learn that. He was interrupted by the arrival of an elegant lady in her 60s, perfectly tidy silver hair, wearing a set that probably cost more than Maya's car. The woman walked toward the table with certain steps, her face marked by an expression of absolute disapproval. Mother! Another man's voice cut the air, and Maya turned to see someone who clearly shared DNA with the newcomers, the same penetrating eyes, the same presence that commanded careless attention. He wore a suit that probably cost 5 digits and carried that unmistakable aura of someone used to being obeyed. I didn't know I would be here today. Christopher Kane, a billionaire of the real estate sector whose name appeared regularly on the financial pages, approached Richard's table with strides, but his eyes were not in his executive colleague. They were fixed in Maya with an intensity that made her swallow dry. Mrs. Eleanor Kane stopped next to Maya, her eyes examining the Philippine waitress with unusual attention. So, to the absolute surprise of all present, she began to move her hands in sign language. Quick, fluid gestures, loaded with emotion. Maya felt her heart shoot. She had not used sign language since she had left that part of her life buried along with so many other pieces of those who used to be. But his fingers responded automatically, moving with a grace that made Richard Ashford choke on his own wine. Are you well? Sinned Mrs. Kane. Her eyebrows frowned with genuine concern. I heard this man being cruel to you. I'm fine, ma'am, Maya responded in signs, her hands shaking slightly. Just doing my job. His work should not include tolerate abuse. Eleanor signaled back, so he turned to Richard with an expression that could freeze hell. She could not hear him, but clearly understood perfectly what he had witnessed. Mother, what's going on? Christopher asked, alternating looks between his mother and Maya. Do you know this waitress? Eleanor ignored his son completely, maintaining his attention in Maya. Where have you learned to signal so fluently? His hands asked with genuine curiosity. Maya hesitated. This was the question she had been avoiding for 3 years, the door she had kept locked with chains and shame and trauma. But looking into Eleanor Kane's kind eyes, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes in the restaurant, something inside her began to crack. I was a certified interpreter, Maya slowly signaled, every gesture bringing memories that she had desperately tried to forget. I worked with the deaf community for 5 years before, first of all, collapse. Eleanor's expression changed instantly. Surprise, confusion, and something deeper. Respect. A certified interpreter serving wine, she signaled back, her posture becoming visibly stricter. This makes no sense at all. Christopher watched the silent exchange with growing frustration. Can anyone explain what the hell is happening? Your mother is having a conversation, Maya said quietly aloud, without taking her eyes from Eleanor, which is apparently more important than meeting the unfounded complaints of this gentleman. Richard exploded. Mad? Are you calling me a liar now in front of witnesses? Daniel, I want this fired woman immediately. The manager quickly approached, his red face with anxiety. Miss Reyes, maybe you better— No. Christopher's voice cut the air like a blade. She won't go anywhere until my mother finishes this conversation. Christopher, this is Richard Ashford of Ashford Investments. Daniel started nervously. One of our most important customers. He has the right to— I know who he is, Christopher interrupted coldly. And frankly, I don't care. My mother is clearly invested in this interaction, and when my mother is interested in something, I pay attention. Eleanor continued to signal to Maya, completely ignoring the chaos forming around. Why is a certified interpreter working as a waitress? What happened? Maya felt tears threaten, but forced them down. This was not the time. Not here. Not in front of these people who saw her as nothing but a disposable servant. But Eleanor's hands were so kind, so genuinely worried that Maya found herself responding with honesty she had not shared for years. I was accused of something I didn't do, she signaled, every heavy gesture with the 3-year pain carrying that burden. My reputation was destroyed. My certification, questioned. My professional life, annihilated, all because of someone I blindly trusted and decided that I was a convenient obstacle to their own goals. Eleanor was very quiet, his eyes fixed on Maya's face with an intensity that made the waitress feel exposed and strangely protected at the same time. Then the older woman turned to her son and began to signal quickly. Christopher, automatically translated to him, I want all the details of this story. Now, Mother, we can't simply— Now. Eleanor has signaled with such ferocity that even Christopher, billionaire used to running meeting rooms, retreated slightly. That's when Maya realized something extraordinary. Eleanor Kane, a woman who had probably never worked a day of service in her life, was looking at her not pity, but with recognition, as if to see something in Maya that others had lost or chosen to ignore. This man, Eleanor signaled, pointing to Richard that he watched everything with growing irritation and confusion. Did he treat you badly? Maya nodded. And your manager? Another nod. Eleanor turned to Daniel with a look that could melt steel. Although he could not hear him make his pathetic excuses, she clearly understood her cowardly complicity. Christopher pulled his cell phone. Daniel, who owns this restaurant? Mr. Kane, please, this is not— Who is the owner? Christopher's voice echoed through the now completely silent hall. Delacroix Gastronomic Groups, Daniel replied with a trembling voice. But I don't see it like— Philippe Delacroix owes me at least 3 substantial favors, Christopher said calmly, dialing a number. Let's see if he values Richard Ashford's loyalty more than my goodwill. This is ridiculous. Richard stood abruptly. All this because of an incompetent waitress who probably shouldn't even be in this country? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the waiters froze with trays in the air. Maya felt every pair of eyes in the restaurant fixed on her, waiting to see if she would break, if she would finally show the anger or humiliation that everyone expected. But instead, she smiled. A small, quiet smile, which carried 3 years of secrets, stored in silent fabric plans during sleepless nights. Mr. Ashford, she said calmly, her voice cutting silence as a sharp knife. I was born in Manila and legally moved to the United States at 8 years old. I have a master's degree in linguistics from NYU and certifications in 7 different languages, including ASL, BSL, and International Sign Language. I worked as the main interpreter at UN conferences before I was 25. She stepped toward him, her black eyes shining with something that made Richard back involuntarily. So maybe, Maya continued softly, incompetence is not who you think. Eleanor began to applaud silently, his hands hitting approval changes that somehow seemed louder than any audible applause could be. Christopher watched Maya with a completely new expression, no more casual curiosity, but something much more dangerous. Genuine interest. My mother is rarely impressed by people, Christopher said slowly, and when she is impressed, there is usually a very good reason. Miss Reyes, would you have a few minutes to talk after your shift is over? Maya looked at Daniel, who looked like a fish trying to breathe out of water. He looked at Richard, whose face had gone through several interesting shades of red and purple. He looked at Eleanor, who signaled silent encouragement. And then Maya made the decision that would change everything. My shift just finished, she said, removing the apron with deliberate movements. And Mr. Kane, I have a lot more than a few minutes of history to tell. If you are genuinely interested, I hope you canceled your next commitments. As Maya walked toward the exit with the cane, she didn't look back. But if he had looked, he would have seen the panic starting to form in the eyes of Richard Ashford. The first flash of a man who had just made a mistake he could not undo. What none of them knew still was that this casual meeting at La Lumiere was not casual at all. Maya Reyes had spent 3 years waiting patiently for the right opportunity, gathering pieces, keeping evidence, preparing for the moment when she could finally expose the truth. And Eleanor Kane, with his unexpected kindness and connection through the sign language, had just given Maya something she could never have planned, a powerful ally with resources to transform whispers of justice into revenge thunder. If this story of prejudice and justice has touched something to you, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what Maya was about to reveal would not only destroy Richard Ashford, would overthrow an entire empire built on lies, betrayal, and the kind of cruelty that is only possible when powerful people think they will never face consequences. Christopher Kane's private office occupied the entire floor of a midtown skyscraper, with ceiling floor windows offering spanning views of Manhattan. Maya had never been in such a place, where silence cost millions and each furniture probably was worth more than her entire apartment in Queens. Eleanor Kane was sitting on an Italian leather sofa, signing excitedly to Christopher as he tried to keep up with the speed of his hands. Maya remained standing near the door, still processing the surreality of the last 30 minutes. "My mother insists that you tell your full story," Christopher finally said, gesturing that Maya would feel. And when Eleanor Kane insists on something, the universe tends to obey. Eleanor signaled something too fast for Christopher to capture, but Maya understood perfectly. "Stop being dramatic and let the girl breathe." For the first time in hours, Maya laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "Your mother says you are being dramatic." "She always says that," Christopher answered with a half-smile. "But going back to the point, you mentioned that you were a certified interpreter. What happened?" Maya took a deep breath. Telling this story was like pulling a badly healed wound, but something in Eleanor's kind presence and Christopher's genuine attention made the words flow more easily than expected. "I worked for the Metropolitan Interpretation Agency," started Maya, her hands automatically signaling Eleanor while talking. "It was the only certified Philippine interpreter in the city specialized in legal cases and high-level doctors. I worked at UN conferences, government meetings, delicate surgeries where communication needs meant the difference between life and death." Eleanor leaned forward, his fixed eyes on Maya's face with almost uncomfortable intensity. "My boss was Richard Ashford." Christopher froze. "Richard Ashford we just saw in the restaurant?" Maya nodded slowly. "The same. He bought the agency 3 years ago, turning it from a community-focused organization into a corporate profit machine. I was the main interpreter responsible for the most important and sensitive cases." "So what has changed?" Christopher asked, but Maya noticed that he was already doing AQUL, something that powerful people do, connecting invisible points, writing puzzles even before all the pieces are revealed. "Victoria Ashford," Maya said the name as if it were poison. "Richard's wife. She decided she wanted to do philanthropic work and convinced Richard to let her manage some of our government contracts. The problem is that Victoria had absolutely no qualification, no training, and considered sign language something that anyone can learn by watching videos on YouTube." Eleanor made a sound of indignation, his hands signaling furiously. "People like that are the reason the deaf community faces so much discrimination and incompetence." "I completely agree," Maya signaled back. But Richard didn't care. All that mattered was to keep Victoria happy and reduce costs, replacing interpreters certified with poorly trained volunteers who worked for free. "Let me guess," Christopher said, his voice getting colder. "You opposed yourself." "I occulted," Maya corrected. "Each case where inadequate interpretation caused problems, each time critical medical information was poorly communicated, each legal meeting where rights were violated because Victoria's volunteer did not understand basic legal terminology." Maya pulled her cell phone, opening a file folder she had had 3 years ago. "I had everything. Audio recordings, internal emails, incident reports that Richard tried to suppress. He planned to present everything to the State Interpreter Certification Board." "Planned?" Christopher captured the verbal time. "Until Victoria discovered," Maya continued, feeling the familiar bitterness climbing on her throat. "I don't know how, but she found out I was documenting her flaws, and she decided that the best defense was a devastating attack." Eleanor signaled. "What did she do?" "She accused me of professional fraud," Maya said calmly, though her hands shake slightly. "I claimed that I had falsified my certifications, that my interpretation in previous cases had been criminally inadequate, which I had charged for unsuccessful services. Richard supported each lie, manufactured documents, convinced important customers to make false testimonials against me." "This is defamation," Christopher said immediately. "Did you sue?" Maya laughed without humor. "With what money?" "Richard froze my last payment, claiming internal investigation. My certification was suspended during the investigation, which meant I couldn't work. All the city's interpretation agencies put me on a blacklist because no one wanted to break with Richard Ashford and his powerful contacts." She looked out the window, to the city that had been her home for 20 years, but suddenly became hostile territory. In 6 months, I went from interpreter sought at international conferences for unemployed reputation destroyed. I had to sell my apartment, my furniture. I ended up living with 3 roommates in a basement in Queens and accepting any work that did not require verification of professional background. And was La Lumiere the best you got? Christopher asked gently. La Lumiere was the only place that hired me after 8 months trying, Maya corrected. And yet, Daniel made it very clear that I was in a permanent, probative period. A single mistake and would be on the street again. Eleanor stood abruptly, signaling with such ferocity that even Christopher retreated. This is unacceptable. This man has destroyed his life by pure cruelty and greed. Yes, Maya simply agreed. It destroyed. And for 3 years I was quiet, accepted degrading jobs, swallowed humiliation, smiled politely as people like Richard treated me like disposable waste. For 3 years? Christopher repeated, capturing the emphasis. And now? Maya found her eyes and Christopher saw something there that made him straighten in his chair. Not blindly anger, not despair, but something much more dangerous. Calculated determination. Now, Maya said calmly, I have 3 years of additional evidence. 3 years observing Richard and Victoria make the same mistakes repeatedly, increasingly carelessly. 3 years documenting each ethical violation, every case of negligence, every lie told to customers and regulators. She pulled a second phone from her pocket, one that Christopher noted to be different from the first, older, clearly used for a specific purpose. 3 years working quietly as a waitress in restaurants where powerful people eat, drink, and forget that servants have ears and memory. Christopher smiled slowly. You have been collecting information all this time. I was trained to observe, memorize, and report with absolute accuracy, Maya replied. It's literally what interpreters do. And it turns out that rich people love to discuss illegal business and unethical schemes, while an incompetent waitress serves wine. Eleanor began to laugh, a silent but genuine laugh, his shoulders shaking with fun. She signaled to Christopher, I really like this girl. Mother says she likes you. Christopher has translated unnecessarily. I know. Maya signaled back to Eleanor with a small smile, and I really like her too. Christopher observed the exchange with a thoughtful expression. Maya, can I ask something straight? Please. Today at the restaurant, when Richard humiliated you publicly, you were calm. Calm down to someone genuinely surprised or terrified. Are you waiting for that? Maya hesitated, then nodded. Richard frequents La Lumiere every Tuesday and Thursday 6 months ago. Always asks the same table. Always complains about something insignificant to show power over the team. I knew that eventually he would notice that the new waitress was the same woman whose life he destroyed. So you manipulated the situation so that we were there, Christopher said, but did not sound accusatory, sounded impressed. I didn't handle it, Maya corrected. But when I learned through the manager that Eleanor Kane had made a reservation for today, and I remembered that she is deaf based on articles I read about you and your family, I maybe suggested to Daniel that it would be appropriate to put the Kane's table near Richard's, as both are VIP customers. Eleanor clapped silently, signaling, smart, very smart. Wait, Christopher lifted a hand. Did you know that my mother could intervene? I hoped she would realize the sign language if I used her close enough for her, Maya admitted. Deaf people always notice when someone signals fluently. It's like finding someone who speaks their Christmas language in a foreign country. And Eleanor Kane has a reputation, through their philanthropic initiatives, to defend causes of accessibility and rights of people with disabilities. Christopher was looking at Maya with a mixture of admiration and caution. You planned that. I planned an opportunity, Maya corrected. I didn't manipulate your actions or emotions. I just created circumstances where the truth could emerge naturally. Eleanor signaled something long and complex. Christopher has translated, my mother wants to know what kind of help you need. And before you answer, she wants to know that she is not offering pity, but because she recognizes someone who has been systematically harmed by people using privilege as a weapon. Maya felt emotion squeeze her throat, but kept her voice firm. I need 3 things. First, access to lawyers who are not afraid of Richard Ashford. Second, a platform to expose not only what he did to me, but the pattern of abuse he perpetuates against vulnerable workers. Third, she paused, finding Christopher's eyes. I need people like you, people with power and resources, understand that Richard Ashford is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a system that allows rich people to destroy lives without consequences, simply because they can pay better lawyers and have the right connections. Christopher nodded slowly. And do you think you can prove it all? I know I can, Maya answered. Because I wasn't the only victim of Richard. I was just the only one who decided to document everything meticulously instead of giving up. Eleanor signaled another question, and this time it was Maya who translated to Christopher. She wants to know why today. Why, after 3 years, you decided it was time to act? Maya smiled, but there was no joy in that smile. There was something much sharper. Because I discovered something for 2 weeks, something Richard and Victoria don't know I know. Something that, when publicly revealed, will not only destroy them, but will also reveal a corruption network that goes far beyond a simple interpretation agency. What did you find out? Christopher asked. Maya looked at both, measuring if she could really trust these people she had known less than 2 hours ago. Then he thought of 3 years of humiliation, 3 years serving wine for people who treated her as invisible, 3 years keeping secrets and waiting for the right moment. Richard Ashford is using unqualified volunteer interpreters in legal cases and high-profile doctors, Maya said calmly, and he is charging prices of customer, certified interpreters, pocketing the difference. We're talking about fraud that totals more than $2 million in the last 18 months. Christopher released a low whistle. But that's not even the worst part, Maya continued. He has government contract to provide interpretation services at immigration hearings. Hearings where the difference between interpretation adequate and inadequate may mean deportation or asylum, family separation or meeting. Eleanor covered his mouth with his hands, visible horror in his eyes. How many people were unfairly deported because Richard's interpreter didn't understand legal terminology? Maya asked rhetorically. How many children were separated from parents because crucial nuances were lost? How many patients received wrong medical treatment because Victoria thought that anyone can interpret? Do you have proof of all this? Christopher asked, his voice tense. Maya showed the secondary phone. I have 3 years of evidence. Richard's audio recordings admitting the scheme for members, emails detailing how to hide the fraud of auditors, testimonies of other interpreters who were threatened when they tried to denounce, documents showing the difference between what Richard charges from customers and what really pays to non-certified volunteers. Why didn't you take this to the authorities? Christopher asked. Because I tried, Maya said bitterly. 2 years ago I compiled everything and took to the state's professional licensing department. Do you know what happened? The investigator was responsible for the case was Richard's personal friend. My report was lost in the system, and a week later, I received a letter from Richard's lawyers threatening me for defamation if I continued spreading malicious lies. Eleanor signaled furiously, and Maya translated, she wants to know how we can help do justice. Honestly, Maya looked at both. I don't know. Richard has protection at levels that I could never penetrate alone. But you, she has gestured to the luxurious office. You have access to people and resources that can really make a difference. Christopher took his phone. I have a friend in the office of the Attorney General, another friend who works in federal fraud investigations, and coincidentally I serve the Supervision Council of Government Contracts for the city. He looked at Maya with renewed intensity. If you give me access to this evidence, I can guarantee that they will reach the right people, people that Richard Ashford cannot buy or intimidate. And in return? Maya asked, because she learned the hard way that no one offers help without expecting something back. In return for nothing, Christopher said firmly. But if you want to do it right, if you want to make sure Richard pay for every life that is destroyed, then we need to be strategic. We need to build a case that even his best lawyers can dismantle. Eleanor signaled something, and this time Christopher translated with a smile. My mother says I finally found a project that is worth it, more interesting than making money grow like a magic plant. Maya felt something hot expand in her chest, hope perhaps mixed with the tempting possibility of royal justice. You understand that this will be ugly, right? Richard won't give up without fighting. He will use every dirty trick, every powerful connection, every penny he has to destroy us. Let him try, Christopher said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I built a billion company from scratch. I survived corporate wars that would make Richard seem amateur. And more important, he looked at his mother who signaled encouragement, then back to Maya. More importantly, I finally have a chance to use all these features and connections for something that really matters. Not to make more money or close more business, but to do genuine justice. Maya wanted to believe. God, how she wanted to believe. But 3 years of disappointment had taught caution. What if your powerful friends decide that protecting Richard is more convenient politically? Then we'll find other ways, Christopher answered without hesitation. Maya, you spent 3 years alone fighting a rigged system against you. You don't have to be alone anymore. Eleanor got up and walked to Maya, taking his hands with a kind but firm grip. She signaled, when I was her age, people told me that deaf woman would never be taken seriously in business, that I should accept my place and be grateful for any crumb of respect. But I refused, and I found allies who believed I deserved more. His eyes shone with fierce determination. You deserve more, Maya Reyes. Deserves justice. Deserves restoration. And I'll use every gram of influence I have to make sure you can both. Maya felt tears threaten, the kind of tears that come when someone finally sees you as a complete human being instead of an inconvenient problem or disposable statistics. "Thank you," she signaled to Eleanor, so he looked at Christopher. "Thanks to both." "You don't thank us yet," Christopher said, already opening laptop on the table. "We have a lot of work ahead. And Maya, I need to warn you, when we start this, Richard will find out, and he will retaliate with everything he has." Maya thought of 3 years of forced silence, 3 years smiling politely while treated as garbage, 3 years swallowing humiliation behind humiliation. He thought of all other victims of Richard: silence, threatened interpreters, defrauded customers, families destroyed by inadequate interpretation in cases of immigration. "Let him come," Maya said calmly, "because this time I'll be prepared, and this time I won't be quiet." What none of them knew still was that Richard Ashford, at that very moment, was in his own office doing urgent calls. Maya's appearance at La Lumiere, her interaction with the cane, the public intervention that ruined her dinner, none of this seemed coincidence to a man who had survived for years being paranoid about potential threats. And Richard Ashford, when threatened, did not retreat. He attacked with surgical precision and absolute cruelty. The war was beginning, but only one side even knew that the first battles had already been fought, and Maya Reyes, the Philippine waitress that everyone underestimated, was about to prove that patience, when combined with purpose, is the most devastating weapon of all. Those who underestimate quiet people often find out too late that silence is not weakness, it is strategy. And Maya Reyes had spent 3 years sharpening her weapons in quiet, waiting for the exact moment to turn every humiliation suffered into fuel into justice, that Richard Ashford would never come. 2 weeks after the meeting at Christopher Kane's office, Maya Reyes was sitting in a discreet coffee in Brooklyn, watching a woman of about 35 years nervously examine the cappuccino cup in front of her. Jennifer Park had been an interpreter at Richard's agency for almost 6 years before being fired under mysterious circumstances. "I shouldn't be here," Jennifer said for the 3rd time, her eyes walking through coffee as if he expected Richard Ashford to materialize from the shadows. "If he finds out that I talked to you, he won't find out," Maya has guaranteed calmly, pushing a document around the table. "And anyway, Jennifer, you have nothing more to lose. He has already destroyed his career." Jennifer caught the roll with tremendous hands, reading the header: Protected Witness Agreement, Office of the New York State Attorney General. His eyes widened. Did you get involvement of the Attorney General?" "I have friends in high places now," Maya responded with a small smile. "Friends who don't like when entrepreneurs fraud government contracts of millions of dollars." In the 2 weeks since that fateful night at La Lumiere, Maya's life had become a whirlwind of secret meetings, legal documentation, and meticulous construction of a case that would leave no escape to Richard Ashford. Christopher Kane had fulfilled each promise, opening doors that Maya didn't even know existed, but it was not easy. Richard, as Maya predicted, had begun her own counteroffensive as she found out she was associating with the cane. "He called me," Jennifer said suddenly. "Richard, 3 days ago. He said he heard rumors that I was spreading lies about the agency. He offered me money to sign a non-disclosure agreement and clarify misunderstandings about my dismissal." Maya leaned forward. "How much money?" $50,000. "And you said?" Jennifer laughed bitterly. "He said he needed to think. He thought he was buying me. What really gave me was the confirmation that he is afraid." Maya smiled. Richard Ashford with fear was Richard Ashford making mistakes, and she was telling each one of them. Her phone vibrated. A Christopher message. "Meeting with Assistant Prosecutor Chen in 2 hours. She wants to hear Jennifer personally. I get car pick you up?" Maya typed back. "We took a subway. Less conspicuous." The answer came immediately. "You think of everything. My mother was right about you." Maya felt warm up her face. In recent weeks, Christopher had become more than an ally, had become a genuine friend, and Eleanor Kane had practically adopted Maya, insisting on weekly dinners where they signaled for hours of everything from politics to philosophy. "Maya?" Jennifer caught her attention back. "What do you want me to say to the prosecutor?" "The truth," Maya simply answered. "All the truth about UNIDE volunteers, about the families of immigrants who were deported because the interpretation was inadequate, about every penny Richard stole pretending to provide services that never properly provided." Jennifer nodded, but her face was pale. "You understand that this will explode, right? Richard has powerful friends, politicians, judges, entrepreneurs. When they realize that we are really going after him, let them realize," Maya said calmly, "because this time I also have powerful allies. And more importantly, I have the truth." What Maya didn't mention, Jennifer, was the second phone that constantly carried now. The one full of recordings Richard Ashford didn't know they existed. 3 years working in elite restaurants had taught Maya something valuable. Rich people talked about everything in front of servants, especially when they drank expensive wine, and Richard Ashford loved dear wine. At that very moment, while Maya was talking to Jennifer, Richard was in her private office receiving news that would make any corrupt entrepreneur sweat cold. "What do you mean by federal audit?" he growled to his lawyer, Maxwell Brighton, who had become considerably less confident in recent weeks. "Exactly that," Maxwell replied, distressed. "The Attorney General's office has requested all the agency's financial records of the last 3 years. Government contracts, payment sheets, interpreter certification documentation, all." Richard threw a crystal paperweight against the wall, where he shattered spectacularly. "This is that waitress, that annoying Philippine who didn't know her place. She went to the cane and now they are using political connections to attack me." "Richard," Maxwell said carefully, "if there is irregularities in our documentation, it would now be the time to inform me." "Irregularities," Richard repeated with a humor laugh. "Do you mean how 60% of our certified interpreters in government contracts are actually university students who know basic sign language and work by tips?" Maxwell's face turned gray. "Please tell me that you have not put it in writing anywhere." Richard did not answer, which was enough response. "Or how did I replace certified interpreters of $150 per hour by unpaid volunteers in cases of immigration and pocketed the difference?" Richard continued, his voice rising. "Or how did I justly adjusted document certifications when auditors asked inconvenient questions?" Maxwell got up abruptly. "Richard, I need to advise you strongly not to discuss this without protection of the most formal lawyer-client privilege, and honestly, you may need specialized criminal representation." "Criminal?" Richard was livid. "Are you telling me that I can face criminal accusations? Fraud against the federal government, document forgery, misappropriation of public funds," Maxwell enumerated. "Richard, if half of what you are implying is true and they can prove you are not looking at fines, you're looking at prison." Richard sat heavily on his leather executive chair. For 3 years, since he had eliminated Maya Reyes as a threat, he had operated on absolute impunity. He had made fortunes outlining the system, reducing costs by replacing qualified professionals with amateur work, and convinced himself that he was too smart to get caught. But Maya Reyes, the incompetent waitress, had done something he had not predicted. She had waited, observed, documentation, and now, with Kane resources, he was triggering a storm that he could not control with money or intimidation. "I need to counteract this situation," Richard finally said. "Maya Reyes needs to be discredited completely before causing more damage." Maxwell hesitated. Richard, as his lawyer, must advise against any action that can be interpreted as a witness or retaliation intimidation. "I'm not asking for cool advice," Richard cut. "I'm saying what needs to happen. Maya Reyes has destroyed my life once when Demiti. Now she thinks she can end work with the help of the cane. Let's see how brave she is when everyone knows what kind of person she really is." What Richard didn't know was that that whole conversation was being monitored, not for illegal listening, but because Maxwell Brighton, a lawyer that Richard had entrusted for years, had received a very interesting visit from Assistant Prosecutor Chen 3 days earlier. And when federal prosecutors offer immunity in exchange for cooperation, even loyal lawyers begin to rethink their alliances. Meanwhile, Maya was in the office of Prosecutor Chen, a 45-year-old woman with a fierce reputation of never losing cases of corruption. Jennifer Park was next to her, and Christopher watched from a corner, her face expressing growing satisfaction as Jennifer detailed years of systematic fraud. "So let me see if I understand it correctly," Attorney Chen said, making Medicue notes. "Richard Ashford charged to the federal government $150 per hour by interpreters certified at immigration hearings, but often sent university students without certification that he paid in pizza and soda." "Or nothing," Jennifer corrected. "Victoria Ashford convinces deaf young people who volunteering as interpreters would be good experience for curricula. Some of these volunteers had only basic ASL fluency. We are talking about audiences where people faced deportation, separation of children, life decisions, or death." Attorney Chen's expression got even harder. "And do you have documentation of that?" Maya slid a folder through the table. "Government contracts showing fees charged. Internal payment sheets showing what was really paid. Richard emails by instructing managers to replace the expensive ones with volunteers whenever possible. Testimonials of clients whose audiences were disasters due to inadequate interpretation. And recordings," Christopher added calmly, "from Richard admitting the scheme for business associates." Prosecutor Chen looked up abruptly. "Recordings? 3 years working as a waitress in restaurants where powerful men drink wine and forget that workers have ears, Maya said simply. New York is a state of consent of a part for recordings. I had every legal right to record conversations I participated in or heard as part of my work serving tables. Christopher smiled, but said nothing. That specific detail had been Maya's idea, not him. She had really thought of everything. This is, Attorney Chen paused, apparently looking for adequate words. This is the most completely documented investigation I've ever seen arrived at my table. Miss Reyes, you should consider a career in law application. I just want justice, Maya answered calmly. For me, for Jennifer, for all the families who were destroyed because Richard Ashford decided that profit mattered more than human lives. Prosecutor Chen closed the folder and looked straight at Maya. Do you understand that this will be very, very ugly? Richard Ashford will hire the best lawyers that money can buy. He will try to destroy his credibility, his reputation, all. He has done it once, Maya said quietly. But this time I'm not alone. And this time he's not fighting a scared waitress. He's fighting the truth supported by irrefutable evidence. Jennifer took Maya's hand under the table, squeezing gently. Christopher nodded with approval, and Prosecutor Chen smiled, the kind of smile that promoters have when they know they have an impossible case to lose. Very well, she said, taking the phone. I will need warrants to apprehend records, witness calls, and authorization for complete criminal investigation. Miss Reyes, Miss Park, I hope they are prepared for the coming months to be intense. We have waited 3 years for that, Maya replied. We can handle a few more months. Outside the office after the meeting ended, Christopher touched Maya's arm gently. Hey, are you okay? I know rummaging all this again can't be easy. Maya looked at him, this man who had risked business relationships, time, and resources to help someone he barely knew. I'm better than well. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm finally fighting back. And you know the best part? What? Richard still thinks he's dealing with the same frightened girl that he destroyed 3 years ago. He has no idea that every humiliation he forced me to swallow, every insult I had to accept in silence, each day working as invisible servant, was just preparing for this moment. Christopher smiled. Remember when I asked if you were ready to make it ugly? I remember. I think the question should have been if Richard Ashford was ready. That night Maya returned to her small apartment in Queens. Her roommates, 2 nurses and a teacher, barely saw her more. Then busy, she had legal preparations and meetings. But that night she needed quiet moment to process everything. Sitting on the tight bed she called her 3 years ago, Maya opened the old laptop and looked at the folder she had kept from the first day of her personal destruction. Inside were screenshots of every lie Richard had told about her, each counterfeit email, each forged document, each testimonial purchased. For 3 years this folder had been its fuel. In the hardest days, when humiliation seemed unbearable, when giving up it seemed easier, she opened these files and remembered. That was not about anger. It was about justice. And now, finally, justice was within reach. Your phone vibrated. A message from Eleanor Kane. Christopher told me about the meeting. I'm very proud of you. Dinner on Sunday? I want to introduce you to some friends who work on immigration reform. They will love your story. Maya smiled, typing back. I would love it. Thank you for believing in me. The answer came quickly. Honey, you made it easy. I just had to open my eyes to see what was always there. An extraordinary woman who refused to be destroyed. Now, sleep well. Difficult weeks ahead. Maya lay down, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind was already 3 movements ahead, anticipating every counterattack of Richard, every dirty trick he would try. She knew the man too well. He was predictable in his cruelty, methodical in his dishonesty. But Maya had something that Richard had never had. Patience built on the foundation of genuine purpose. She wasn't doing this for petty revenge. He was doing for each immigrant family who lost a member due to inadequate interpretation, for each qualified interpreter who lost work to uncooked volunteers, for every vulnerable person Richard Ashford explored because he thought he could. And tomorrow, when the sun was born over New York, every piece Maya had positioned carefully for 3 years would start to move. Richard Ashford had spent 3 years believing that destroying Maya Reyes had only been calculated business movement, another obstacle eliminated on the way to larger profit. But he was about to learn the most expensive lesson in his life. Underestimating quiet and observing people is not just a tactical error, it is a sentence of professional death. And Maya Reyes, the incompetent waitress he had forgotten so easily, was about to become the nightmare he would never see to be too late to escape. The morning of March 15th began just like any other for Richard Ashford. Coffee express prepared by his personal assistant. Quick reading of the Wall Street Journal board meeting at 9 a.m. What he didn't know was that this would be the last normal morning of his life. Mr. Ashford, His secretary entered the office with a pale face, holding a tablet as if it were a bomb about to explode. "You need to see that, now." Richard barely looked up. "If it's any further complaint from Maya Reyes and her billionaire friends, I've talked to Maxwell about." "It's not a complaint, sir. It's a federal search and seizure warrant, and there are FBI teams in the lobby. Now." The newspaper fell from his hands. In the next 20 minutes, Richard Ashford watched his meticulously built empire collapse with impressive speed. Federal agents traveled every inch of their office, seizing computers, files, phones. Employees watched in shock while the man who had ruled that iron fist space was informed of his constitutional rights. "Richard Ashford, you are being accused of fraud against the federal government, misappropriation of public funds, falsification of official documents, and conspiracy to obstruct justice," announced Special Agent Morrison, his voice echoing for the now silent office. "You have the right to remain silent." But Richard Little listened. His eyes were fixed on television mounted on the wall, where each news channel seemed to be conveying the same devastating story. "Scandal at the Interpretation Agency, billions in fraud against vulnerable immigrants," proclaimed CNN. "Executive faces criminal accusations, systematic forgery cost unfair deportations," reported the NBC. And the worst of all, at Fox News, "War Filipina exposes multimillionaire scheme, 3 years documenting evidence lead to federal accusations." The screen showed Maya Reyes at a press conference alongside Prosecutor Chen, Christopher Kane, and an impressive line of federal authorities. But what destroyed Richard completely was to see Jennifer Park there too, along with 4 former employees he thought he silenced with threats and bribes. "For 3 years, while Richard Ashford treated me as an invisible servant," Maya spoke straight to the cameras, her calm but power-loaded voice, "I document each incriminating conversation, every admission of guilt, every moment he and his associates were openly discussing how they were delighting the government and destroying lives." The screen has changed to show photographs. Richard at business dinners at his private club at La Lumiere, and in each image, highlighted in red circles, it was Maya, serving wine, removing dishes, invisible but always present. "Powerful people forget that workers have ears," Maya continued. "They forget that waitresses, drivers, security guards, we all observe, hear, and remember. And some of us, when treated with systematic cruelty, decided that observing is not enough. We decided to document." Chris Topher Kane took the microphone. "Mrs. Reyes has brought us evidence that any promoter would dream of having. Audio recordings where Mr. Ashford admits to defraud government contracts. Emails detailing how to replace unrecognized interpreters. But more than that," Chen prosecutor added, her sharp voice, "she gave us something invaluable. Names, dates, specific cases where families were destroyed because Richard Ashford decided that profit mattered more than human lives." The screen has changed again, now showing faces, dozens of them, separate families, children crying, deported parents, and below each image a devastating subtitle, "Immigration Audience, Ashford Agency, Separate Family." Richard felt bile climb his throat. 47 families, Maya said, her voice breaking slightly for the first time. 47 families we have identified so far that they have been unfairly separated because the interpretation provided by Richard Ashford's agency was criminally inadequate. And that's just the beginning of the investigation. In the office, Richard finally found his voice. "This is absurd. She's lying. It's a disgruntled employee trying." "Senor Ashford," Agent Morrison has interrupted calmly, "maybe you want to save your explanations for your lawyer. In fact, where is Mr. Brighton?" As if summoned, Richard's phone rang. It was Maxwell. "Richard, The voice of his lawyer sounded strange. "Guilty. I need to tell you something. 3 weeks ago I was contacted by the attorney's office. They offered me immunity in exchange for complete cooperation." Richard's world stopped spinning. Did you betray me?" he whispered. "You made me an accomplice of federal crimes." Maxwell exploded. "We forged documents, Richard. We lied for federal investigators. Did you think I was going to prison to protect your schemes?" The connection was cut. Richard looked around his office. Agents turning on files, staff avoiding his gaze, television cameras capturing every second of his public humiliation. And then his cell phone started to vibrate incessantly, messages reaching the hills. Of the board of directors, emergency meeting called to vote its immediate removal. From Victoria, his wife, "My lawyers will contact. I want divorce and I am cooperating with the authorities to protect my own interests." Of corporate customers, immediate cancellation of all effective contracts now. Of banks, freezing assets pending criminal investigation. And then a message that made your blood freeze completely. It was of an unknown number, but Richard recognized the style immediately. 3 years ago, you told me that I should know my place. Today I'm finally helping you know yours. With love, the incompetent waitress, Mr. Richard threw the phone against the wall, where he shattered satisfactorily. But the destruction of a phone could not erase reality. He was completely, irrevocably ruined. At the press conference, a reporter asked the question that was in everyone's mind. Mrs. Reyes, why wait 3 years? Why not expose it all immediately? Maya smiled. Small, sad, but determined. Because when you lose everything as I lost, you learn something valuable. Hasty revenge is momentary satisfaction, but true justice, meticulously built with irrefutable evidence, is permanent. She looked straight at the camera, and Richard, watching her invaded office, felt she was looking straight at her soul. Richard Ashford taught me that powerful people can destroy lives without consequences, so I spent 3 years proving that he was wrong. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many lawyers have, no matter how many people intimidated silence, the truth, when documented with patience and accuracy, always wins. Christopher Kane added, and when this truth is supported by people willing to use their resources and influence for good, it becomes unstoppable. Mrs. Reyes needed no revenge. She needed justice. And today, justice was served. Eleanor Kane, who had insisted on participating in the personal press conference, signaled something that Maya translated in an emotionally voice. She says she met many people in her life, but few with the silent force of transforming suffering into purpose, humiliation into determination, and real change in justice. She is honored to call Maya friend. The questions continued for another hour, but Richard could no longer watch. He was being escorted out of his own building, handcuffs shining under cameras while reporters shouted questions he couldn't, or not know I was going as, answer. On the sidewalk, he found the eyes of a homeless man who often asked for alms nearby. The man recognized him and, to Richard's absolute horror, began to applaud slowly. Others in the crowd, office workers, bicycle messengers, street vendors, all those Richard had never considered totally human, joined the sarcastic applause. "Here's it," shouted someone. "The man who destroyed families for profit." "I hope prison food is better than you deserve," added another. Richard was pushed into a federal car, the doors closing over the shouts of the crowd. As the vehicle walked away, he saw on the screen of a Pacelser Maya Reyes phone being hugged by Eleanor Kane, Christopher, besides smiling genuine pride, and Richard Ashford, a man who had spent decades believing that power and money put him above consequences, finally understood the devastating truth. He had not been defeated by billionaires or federal prosecutors or brilliant lawyers. He had been defeated by a 28-year-old Filipina waitress he had treated as a disposable waste, never imagining that she was a master's, certified interpreter, fluent in 7 languages, and, more dangerously, owner of infinite patience and photographic memory. The irony was so bitter that Richard almost laughed, almost. But then he thought of the 47 families, in separated children from parents, in the arrest years I would face, in the empire transformed into ashes, in the wife asking for divorce, in the powerful friends who were already beginning to pretend they never knew him. And Richard Ashford, sitting on that federal car's rear seat, finally understood what Maya had tried to teach the world. Underestimating invisible people is not just arrogance. It is a sentence of self-destruction. 3 years Maya waited. 3 years documenting, observing, preparing. And when it finally acted, it was not with anger or uncontrolled emotion. It was with surgical accuracy of those who understand that the best revenge is not to make the enemy suffer momentarily, but to ensure that the consequences of their own actions pursue him for the rest of his life. Richard Ashford had built an empire about lies and cruelty. Maya Reyes simply assured that that empire collapsed under the weight of his own rot. And now only one question remained. After justice is served so completely, what comes next to those who dared to fight impossibilities and won? 6 months after the arrest of Richard Ashford, Maya Reyes was sitting in an office she never imagined having, floor to the ceiling, a privileged view of Manhattan, furniture chosen by herself without having to check prices. The plate at the door simply said, Reyes Advocacy and Interpretation Services, where voices matter. Maya, Senator Collins is in line too, announced her assistant Marcus Chen. No relationship with the family he had tried to destroy her, only a brilliant young immigrant she had hired specifically because she intimately knew the cost of denied opportunities. She wants to discuss her testimony to the immigration reform hearing next week. Maya took the phone, her eyes briefly landing in Forbes magazine open on her table. The 30 most influential entrepreneurs of 2024 proclaimed the cover, and there she was, no longer the invisible waitress, but the woman who had dismantled an empire of corruption and built something infinitely more valuable in her place. But business success was not what made her smile that morning. It was the email you had just received. Maya, I am Rosa Hernandez. You do not know me, but my family was one of 47 separated because of the inadequate interpretation of the agency Ashford. Thanks to her courage to expose the truth, my husband was finally released from immigration arrest after 2 years. My daughters have their father back. There are not enough words to thank. Tears blocked Maya's vision. Emails like this arrive daily now. Gathered families, restored lives. Justice finally served for people the system had systematically failed. Ready for the meeting with the council? Christopher Kane appeared at the door, carrying 2 cups of coffee. In recent months, he had not only become the main investor of his company, but also something much more important, although neither had put it in words yet. Always, Maya replied, accepting coffee. How is your mother? Eleanor is doing exactly what you advised you, pressing all philanthropic organizations that support implementing strict accessibility and interpreter certification standards. She says you have turned your anger into productive action. Christopher smiled. She also insists that you come to dinner on Sunday. Something about introducing her to UM's special friend who is, at the time to meet interesting people. Maya laughed, but before she could answer, her phone rang again. It was Jennifer Park. Call the TV, Jennifer said without preamble. Channel 7, now. Maya took the remote control, and Christopher moved to be beside her while the screen came to life. What they saw left them in absolute silence. Richard Ashford was being escorted out of a federal building, handcuffs shining under cameras, but it was not the handcuffs that captured Maya's attention. It was the completely broken man who used them. The arrogant and cruel Richard she had known had disappeared, replaced by someone who seemed to have aged decades in 6 months. Sentenced to 8 years in federal arrest, the reporter announced, in addition to refund of $2.3 million and permanent prohibition of government contracts. The judge called Ashford crimes a systematic betrayal of public trust and exploitation calculated from the most vulnerable of our society. The camera showed Victoria Ashford, now Victoria Morrison, having resumed her single name, leaving a different court. Mrs. Morrison agreed to completely cooperate with the authorities, continued the reporter, and received suspended sentence in exchange for testimony against her ex-husband and refund of assets acquired through fraudulent funds. It looks like karma really exists, Christopher murmured. It wasn't karma, Maya corrected gently. It was a consequence. Karma implies that the universe magically punishes bad people, but what really happened was that Richard Ashford spent years committing crimes, and eventually, with enough evidence and the right people paid attention, faced the appropriate legal justice. Your phone vibrated with a message. It was of a number she didn't recognize immediately, but the message made her freeze. Maya, it's Maxwell Brighton. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I need to know. Your case made me rethink my career, that there was still a chance to do the right thing. Maya showed the message to Christopher, who plagued softly. You really changed lives, don't you? Not just Richard's victims, but even his accomplices. I didn't change lives alone, Maya replied. You, Eleanor, Attorney Chen, Jennifer, all the other witnesses who found the courage to say, it was collective work. I started the conversation. At that moment, Eleanor Kane entered the office, signaling excitedly even before Christopher was able to translate. I just got out of meeting with 3 senators. They will introduce federal legislation demanding rigorous certification to all interpreters in government cases. They will call Law Maya Reyes of Interpretation Protection. Maya felt emotion squeeze her throat. They can't, it's recognition of what you did. Christopher translated what Eleanor was still signaling. You have turned personal tragedy into systemic change. How many people can you say that? Maya thought of all messages of gathered families, all certified interpreters that now had stronger protections against replacement for inappropriate work, in all vulnerable voices that would finally be heard properly, because someone had decided that silence was no longer acceptable. Do you know what is funny? Maya said finally. Richard thought he was destroying me when he fired me. He thought he was teaching me my place when he forced me to work as a waitress. But what he really did was put me exactly where I needed to document his own fall. 3 years serving wine, Christopher said thoughtfully. 3 years being invisible. 3 years you have turned into a gun. No arms, Maya corrected. Tool of justice. Weapons destroy indiscriminately. I just guaranteed that the truth be revealed, and that the law did your work. Eleanor signaled something long and complex, and this time Maya translated to Christopher. She says she has met many powerful entrepreneurs in her life, but few who understand that true power is not the ability to destroy other people, but ability to lift those who have been unjustly overthrown. He had knocked on the door. It was Maya's entire team, 8 interpreters certified from various origins, each with a history of overcoming or fighting systems that tried to marginalize them. "Sorry to interrupt," said David, a deaf interpreter whose fluency in 5 languages of different signals made him indispensable. "But we have just received a request to sue PPCR Interpretation Services at the UN Conference on Immigrant Rights. They specifically asked for you to lead the team." Maya smiled. 3 years ago, working at UN conferences was his distant dream. Today was a normal Tuesday. "Except," she signed back to David, who smiled widely. When everyone left, Maya was left alone with Christopher and Eleanor. "You guys know I could never have done this alone, right? Without you guys, without your resources and connections, Richard would still be ruining lives. Don't underestimate your own contribution," Christopher said firmly. "We provided resources, but you provided courage, evidence, and vision for how to turn individual scandal into systemic change. This is your victory, Maya." Eleanor signed. "Now what? What's the next step?" Maya looked around her office, at the walls decorated with certificates of appreciation from gathered families, at the photos of her diverse and talented team, at the view of the city that for so many years had treated her as invisible. "Now," she said calmly, "we continue the work, because for every Richard Ashford who falls, there are 10 others exploiting vulnerable people. For every family we reunite, there are hundreds still separated by broken systems. Winning one battle does not mean the war is over." "Then you'll keep fighting," Christopher said. It wasn't a question. "Forever," Maya confirmed, "but now with resources, a platform, and powerful allies. Richard taught me a valuable lesson. Strategic patience combined with meticulous documentation is more powerful than impulsive anger. I will use this lesson to help others who are where I was." Her phone vibrated again. Another family email thanking her. Another life touched by the justice Maya had helped bring. She read it aloud to Christopher and Eleanor, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. "You know," Christopher said gently, "you keep thanking us for helping you, but Maya, you gave us something much more valuable, real purpose. Eleanor and I spent decades making money grow like a magic plant, as she likes to say. You showed us that wealth without justice is just empty accumulation." Eleanor nodded vigorously, signaling, "You reminded us why power and resources exist, not to build empires, but to build bridges." Maya felt tears threatening, but this time they were tears of pure gratitude. 3 years ago, broken and alone, she couldn't have imagined this moment, sitting in her own office, surrounded by people who saw her as a complete human and not a disposable servant, making a real difference in the lives of vulnerable people. "So," Christopher said with a mysterious smile, "ready for your next adventure?" "What adventure?" He pulled an envelope from his inside jacket pocket. "Invitation to be a keynote speaker at the International Labor Rights Conference in Geneva. 3,000 delegates from 140 countries wanting to hear how a Filipino waitress brought down an empire of corruption and transformed an entire industry." Maya took the invitation with shaking hands. Geneva, international stage, opportunity to amplify message for global reach. "And there's more," Eleanor signed, her face glowing with excitement. "Publisher wants to publish his story, not just about Richard, but about all the years of documenting, surviving, planning. They think it can inspire millions of people who feel invisible and powerless." "A book?" Maya could barely process it. "About me? About you? About everyone like you," Christopher corrected. "About every person who has ever been underestimated, marginalized, treated as disposable. About what happens when these people decide that silence is no longer acceptable." Maya looked at the invitation, then at Christopher and Eleanor, these two people who had seen humanity in her when the world only saw waitress uniforms, and suddenly he understood with crystal clarity. This was the true victory. It wasn't Richard's arrest, although that was satisfactory. It wasn't a success for his company, although it was gratifying. True victory was transformation from pain to purpose, from humiliation to inspiration, from forced invisibility into a powerful platform for real change. "I accept," she said finally. "Geneva, book, everything. Because if my story can make one person feel less alone in their struggle, can give one person the courage to document injustice instead of silently accepting it, then every second of suffering was worth it." Eleanor pulled her into a tight hug, signing against her shoulder. "So proud of you, so proud." When they separated, Christopher was smiling with tenderness that made Maya's heart skip a beat. "So, about that dinner on Sunday, yes? Maybe we can make it celebration, just the 3 of us, to mark not just your professional victories, but—" He hesitated, rare vulnerability crossing his face, "perhaps to discuss future possibilities that are not strictly professional." Maya felt warm up her face, but found her eyes firmly. "I would love." That night, after everyone left, Maya was alone in her office watching the city light her lights against the sky darkening. 3 years ago, he had looked at this same town of the basement window in Queens, feeling completely defeated. Today he looked at an office on the 34th floor that had built with his own work, surrounded by evidence that justice, though difficult, although demanding almost superhuman patience, it was possible. Your phone vibrated one last time. Jennifer Park message. I just accepted a position as Director of Ethics for the new Government Accessibility Service Agency. Maya, you started revolution. Now it's up to us to make sure you continue. Maya typed back. I didn't start revolution. I just refused to be quiet. The revolution happens when enough people make the same choice. She looked at her own reflection on the window glass. No longer invisible waitress, no more silent victim, but a woman who had turned greater defeat into platform for systemic change. Richard Ashford had tried to destroy her by teaching her place, but what he really taught was infinitely more valuable lesson, that true power does not come from title, money, or social status. It comes from refusing to accept injustice, of meticulously documenting, of strategic and, most important, patience to use their own fuel to ensure that others do not suffer in the same way. The best revenge was not to destroy Richard Ashford, although it was fair and necessary. The best revenge was to build something so significant, so impactful, so transformative that all that underestimated her were forced to recognize. Maya Reyes has never been an incompetent waitress or disposable immigrant. It has always been exactly what it is now. Unstoppable force of justice disguised as humility, a brilliant strategist hidden into a service uniform, revolutionary patient waiting for an exact moment to transform entire system. And while Manhattan lights flashed below her like land stars, Maya Reyes smiled, small, quiet, but absolutely triumphant. Because in the end, people like Richard always lose, not because universe is fair, but because eventually, inevitably, those who underestimate and exploit that invisibility is dangerous illusion. The invisible have always been watching, they were always documenting, they were always waiting. And when they finally act, realized in patience, there is no power in the world that can stop them. Maya Reyes's story proves universal truth that powerful people constantly forget. Underestimate someone does not make them weak. It only ensures that when they finally show their strength, no one will be prepared for the storm that will trigger. Richard Ashford destroyed Maya's career thinking he was eliminating insignificant obstacle. But what he really did was create something much more dangerous. Someone with absolutely nothing to lose and all the time in the world to plan perfect justice. And this, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. Never, ever underestimate quiet people who watch everything, because when they finally decide it's time to speak, the whole world will stop to hear. If this story has inspired you to never accept injustice silently, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because every story we share is a reminder that it matters how powerless you feel today. Change always starts with a brave person enough to say, no more.